We open to find a ship pooping yellow and getting hit by lightning in response. A crotchety old git at the helm starts ranting, and the fact he's being played by somebody with a recognisably distinctive voice suggests he's important, so let's bring out the wheel of names. We'll be calling him... Slutty Bartfast by Commander Tara Polan. The target of Slutty Bartfast's shouting is a space cloud of some sort, or is it? That centre point almost resembles a cave or mouth, and he's talking to the cloud as though it's aware, asking if it's surprised by his presence. There are sparks and a bit of lightning on his console as we watch him fly towards the fog. Bollocks to that guy, though. Let's catch up with Voyager. A particularly jaunty-looking Janeway arrives on the bridge, and we get some banter about finding a wormhole, one that leads straight back home to the very sector that Earth's in. Sounds proper dodgy to me, and Janeway seems of the same opinion. There are weird readings coming from it too, almost as though it were a life form, so I'm guessing it's the same space fog we saw Slutty Bartfast flying towards. We'll stick a probe in it to find out more, which is going to be quite the diplomatic incident if the fog turns out to be sentient, especially if that wasn't its mouth. The Delta Flyer's on its way back to Voyager after failing to find some deuterium in an away mission. I guess those improvements to the Bussard collectors on Voyager that Borg Jesus made a few episodes ago weren't an overwhelming success. Still, it's not been a total bust. Seven and Paris took Naomi with them for a bit of experience, so there was educational value at least. She's a bit disappointed that we didn't get to do any shooting, a view that Paris supports, but the only responsible adult on the ship won't let them. As a consolation prize, Paris lets her fly the ship for a bit. That might sound like a questionable plan, but statistically she's crashed 100% fewer shuttles than him. Naomi retains her winning streak and we return to Voyager. Paris goes to drop off an unconscious Naomi while Seven makes a start on the mission report. She doesn't get the chance. Astrometrics has been taken over by the bridge crew investigating this wormhole jobby, and they look a whole lot jollier than they did before. Well, except Tuvok, obviously, but I'm sure he's smiling on the inside. They tell her what they've found, apparently now convinced that it's genuine. Seven wants to know why they hadn't noticed it until getting this close, but nobody's listening. They all go off to celebrate while Seven starts to check things for herself. She goes to see Janeway a little later. There's nothing wrong with long-range scanners, so they should have seen this wormhole ages ago, and there are some weird science thingies coming from it too. Not to worry, says Janeway. The probe they stuck in it received messages from Starfleet, and they say everything's completely legit, honest. Seven urges caution, suggesting we should double-check for ourselves, only to be overruled by Janeway. The wormhole might bugger off at any time, so we've all got to rush headlong into it at full speed as soon as possible. Chakotay interrupts their conversation to give Janeway a tablet. Being in contact with Starfleet has meant we've had a mail delivery, which is an odd thing to prioritise if we're going to be back soon, but I'm sure it's all above board. I mean, how could it not be? There's nothing dodgy about Janeway receiving a letter from her former fiancé saying he's dumped her replacement, nor about Chakotay being told he's received a full pardon along with a job offer. I wonder if Kim's letter was from the Federation's leading scientists telling him that they'd finally found his missing personality. It's all about as credible as a politician's smile, and Seven isn't buying it. Seven's doing some investigative journalism, and by investigative journalism I mean hacking into Janeway's personal log. When they finally do return to Earth, maybe she could get a job at one of Rupert Murdoch's newspapers. The first log details finding the wormhole, but concludes the whole thing was a deception to lure them in. The second says they shat a probe at it and started receiving signals, which could maybe, possibly, perhaps, be Starfleet. The last has Janeway setting a course for the thing with the belief they'll be home in time for Coco. Whatever's kicking off, it only took 2 hours to reel Voyager's crew in. If there was any doubt, Neelix dispels it. There's a letter for Seven addressed to Annika Hansen, apparently from an aunt. Whatever's bewitched the crew is now having a go at her. And Neelix's news? He's been appointed as a Federation ambassador to a whole sector, despite nobody in the Alpha Quadrant knowing who the fuck he is, let alone interviewing him for a job. And Paris has already fallen under the spell too, having accepted a job from an old friend to become a test pilot. If all the biologicals on the ship are compromised, let's try our resident photonic. Once brought online, we discover the doc's not even been told about the wormhole. Seven shares her concerns, and the doc agrees to grab a few random crew members for tests. Chakotay calls Seven to the bridge so she can see this wormhole for herself, along with a signal that's totally being sent through it. I wonder if the people not born on Earth are seeing a different planet. Paris tells us we'll be at the wormhole in a little under an hour. Whatever Seven's planning to do, it'll need to be soon. We're in astrometrics trying to find out more about the wormhole. The computer says it looks legit, though I'd point out it's the same computer that thinks we received genuine Starfleet messages, so maybe we shouldn't be entirely trusting it. Looks like Seven's figured that out too. She spies something that might be a ship, only for the computer to tell her it definitely isn't one. She ignores the assessment and tries to call it. The call's answered by Slutty Bartfast. He tells her that this is a deception, with the words, "He knows what you want," before the signal is broken. Not because of the wormhole, but because power to astrometrics has been cut off. Tuvok turns up to explain that we need this power elsewhere, and it's definitely not because you're getting too close to finding things out. Seven tries reasoning with him, arguing that an emotionally balanced approach would be to hear her concerns, and she's rewarded by being thrown out of astrometrics and told not to come back. She instead goes to the cargo bay that she still calls her home because they haven't given her quarters yet. While working on a console, she hears a noise, and it turns out to be Naomi. She's hiding because everyone's acting proper fucking weird and she doesn't like it. All the others are happy about the prospect of returning home, but her home is here. It's where all the people she knows are. Whatever's controlling the others can't touch her because she doesn't have anywhere else she would rather be. Seven tells Naomi to stay here with that frankly fucking terrifying flotter doll while she goes to try and stop whatever's happening. Maybe the docs figured something out by now. We go to see him and are instead greeted by the shit-eating grin of Tom Paris. The doc's offline because science and won't be back till we're home. Terribly sorry. And wouldn't you know it, some other science reasons mean Seven will have to spend the trip in stasis. Chakotay even brought some guards to tuck her in. Isn't that considerate? We go to her cargo bay and she fiddles with the console under the pretense of adjusting her regeneration cycle. The real reason is to stick up a Borg shield, one that she can walk straight through. Chakotay raises an alarm while Seven does more fiddling and calls Naomi over. Seven leaves her in charge of pressing some buttons if a circle flashes, all while ignoring the calls of Chakotay. The reason for the button presses are to block Kim from shutting down the force field, meaning that, technically, Voyager's security systems have now been beaten by an actual child. Looks like Seven's been learning more from Janeway than just how to be human. She opens an unsecured box and pulls out a rifle before ordering the computer to teleport her to engineering. B'Elanna takes the first pooping, but Seven at least has the good grace to apologise. The other two don't get the same courtesy, but then they're extras, so fuck 'em. A little fiddling turns on a force field, and she starts trying to shut down Voyager's engines. Tuvok finds out the hard way about the force field by face-planting into it. He can remove it, but it'll take a few minutes, news that leaves Janeway frustrated, but there's not much she can do about it. Or maybe she can. She's going to send some lightning through the console that Seven's using. It works, and Seven takes a nap as Voyager closes on the wormhole. Except it's not a wormhole, of course. It's the cloud with a mouth cave, and it closes behind us. Voyager takes some lightning hits just like Seven did, and as the crew have visions of their promised rewards, they all take a nap. It would appear I was wrong. Not everybody took a nap, as Naomi's still with us. Moving around the unconscious crew, she goes to find Seven in engineering. That force field's still in the way, so she shouts for Seven to wake up instead. She does so, and after disabling the field, Naomi joins her. Seven asks after the crew, and is told that they're all having a lovely kip. Some shaking happens, with Seven saying it's because the hull's breaking down. I think Mouthcloud is starting to digest us. Let's go to astrometrics and try to sort shit out. We find an unconscious Neelix on the way, so things are starting to look up already. Looks like Mouthcloud isn't bothering to lie to the computer anymore, so we instead see what's really here, something big and alive. We could probably figure out how to escape on our own given enough time, but why bother doing all that when we can just ask the lad who knows more about all this? Seven locates Slutty Bartfast and gives him a call. Rather delightfully, he thinks we're a deception, a great big ship come to rescue him. That's clearly bollocks. Seven points out that his shields are going to fail in 15 minutes anyway, so what would be the point? He can't argue that logic, and we teleport him over to Voyager. He's still suspicious, testing if Naomi is real before accepting that he's not being lied to. Once that's over with, it's lore dump time. Big beastie, telepathic lure, feeds on starships. Slutty Bartfast has been hunting it for 40 years or so, and he's immune to its siren song. Well, mostly anyway, he's inside the fucking thing after all. Still, he has a plan for escape, and by escape he means straight-up killing Mouthcloud. We're recruiting the Doctor into our group and bringing him up to speed with what's happening. He's obviously a touch concerned about all the other crew being asleep, so while Slutty Bartfast fetches his ship, somehow, we're going to grab a crew member. Slutty Bartfast returns as the Doc starts treating B'Elanna. Taking a look at the flashy thing on her neck, Slutty Bartfast says it won't work, as he tried something similar. The Doc's not too chuffed at having someone tell him his job and does it anyway. B'Elanna wakes and is briefly lucid before claiming she sees members of the Marquis alive and well. She starts talking to the people in her mind, ignoring the Doc's attempts to get her attention before falling back asleep. The lure is too strong, just as it was for all of Slutty Bartfast's mates. As the Doc is working on the data we have for Mouthcloud, Slutty Bartfast is telling him about his own experience. A colony ship full of families, one being his, and the illusion of a perfect new world. He must have been on another ship as he responded to their distress call and found only a fading trail, spending the 40 years since finding a way to kill the bastard that ate them. The Doc says that, according to his findings, Mouthcloud's been around for a good 200,000 years, and there's no evidence that it's sentient. Slutty Bartfast thinks that's a dubious conclusion, but it doesn't make a difference to his goal, so whatever. As to a solution, we might have found the tools for the job. While Seven is comforting Naomi, Slutty Bartfast is looking through our weapons manifest. Our fireworks take his fancy, and he says sticking one of these in its guts might fuck Mouthcloud up. The Doc wants a more peaceful solution, saying Mouthcloud would puke us back out if it felt we were unpleasant. Seven suggests Slutty Bartfast's weapons mixed with some of our warp juice might be enough to make us taste like galactic Leola root. Sounds like a plan, so let's give it a try. The Doc's sending Slutty Bartfast back to his ship, and with some shield modifications that should help it resist being in Mouthcloud's gullet. Slutty Bartfast's impressed with the Doctor's skill set and offers him a place on his ship, which he declines. Even if he didn't have a duty here, a hunting party would go against his oath to do no harm. We teleport Slutty Bartfast away and pop down to engineering. The Doc sets up a console to do all the stuff available on the bridge, so we can fly it from here. Voyager farts out a cloud of white, and Slutty Bartfast poops yellow at it, causing it to ignite. Seven says that it's worked and both ships have been spat out by Mouthcloud. A call to Slutty Bartfast provides the obvious twist that we're still inside and the readings of being ejected were bullshit. Seven doesn't understand why it's affecting her now, and the Doc explains that getting back to Earth wasn't a desire it could use against her. Escaping from its stomach, however, that's something she wants. We fart out some more white, and Slutty Bartfast lights that one too. Mouthcloud decides that maybe it doesn't want to eat us after all, and coughs up both ships. Seven thinks we should do some additional legging it just in case, and the Doc goes off to sort out the crew. Slutty Bartfast calls to bid us farewell, declining the offer to repair bits of his ship. That would take time, and he doesn't want to risk losing Mouthcloud, so I guess he still wants to kill the bastard. People are starting to wake up. Janeway wants to know where we are, and a disappointed Paris tells her we're still in the Delta Quadrant, and that wormhole's gone too. Oh, and everything's being controlled from engineering for some reason. Janeway calls for an explanation, but Seven palms it off to the Doctor so she can go for a kip. A little later, Seven finds Naomi in astrometrics. She's looking at information about Earth after Ensign Mum said she should learn more about it. Naomi doesn't see what all the fuss is about, an opinion shared by Seven, but they both agree they'll find out when they get there. We end with a shot of Slutty Bartfast repairing his ship. A look from his window shows he's managed to make his way back to Mouthcloud, and we leave him to hunt his whale as we fly away. We'll get the continuity hole out of the way first. One of the hooks in Janeway is the imaginary letter from her ex, Mark, saying his engagement was broken off. All well and good, except he wasn't engaged. He was married, a fact we learned in the Season 4 episode Hunters. I get the delusions being implausible, but as the desires are coming from the minds of the victims themselves, it makes no sense for them to be factually inaccurate on such a detail. It's a bit like B'Elanna imagining all the Marquis members were alive again, but saying she thought they'd been killed by cheese rather than cardigans. Utterly inconsequential to the goal of the hallucination, and runs contrary to the information being used to make it. On to the main course then, and it's a bit of a mixed bag for me. That many of the plot elements in this are ideas we've seen elsewhere doesn't help. We've been trapped inside a big beastie before. We did that back in the very first season, in fact. You'll have realised they're just ripping off Moby Dick, of course. They even reference it in the script. There's certainly logic to the phrase, if you're going to steal, then steal from the best, but the story was already 150 years old by this point, so it's been done to death in every conceivable way. Hell, it's not even the first time it's been referenced this season, with Paris making a comment on it back in the episode 30 Days. And the rest of the crew being incapacitated so we can focus on the efforts of a few is a well-trodden path in Voyager as well. We've even had an episode where it was done in essentially the same way. Season 2's persistence of vision had the crew taken out by hallucinations of what they wanted. Add all this together and the result is something that feels a bit, well, worn. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's a reason why so many of us prefer to laze around the house in comfortably familiar clothes, but just as with stories, constant reuse without adding new material can leave things feeling a little threadbare. This story isn't quite into the territory of having its arse hanging out, but I think it's fair to say the elastic's gone. With that analogy thoroughly murdered, let's move on to the things I liked. That list essentially boils down to the people in it. I've mentioned before that Naomi is fast becoming one of my favourite characters in the show, and we build on that again here. Scarlett Palmer's performance is enjoyable and she works well with Jerry Ryan. Naomi's actions in this one also return to a question I first posed way back in the Season 2 episode Elogium. In that video I asked what purpose returning to Earth serves for a generational ship. Naomi's home isn't Earth, or the Federation, or the Alpha Quadrant. It's Voyager. Everybody and everything she's ever known is here, and the prospect of having that taken away is enough to make her immune to the shenanigans affecting everyone else. The implication of this is that every time the Voyager crew celebrate a fortuitous shortcut, she's instead feeling the opposite. In her mind, that goal will break up the Voyager family. Taken to its extreme, she might even then associate the two things, thinking the desire to get back is partly the desire for that separation. Naomi may be old for her age, something I think many of us watching will feel a kinship with, but she's still a child and it's not unreasonable for her to see things as they affect her. The Doc and Seven work well together here as they have previously. The pair of them essentially form an outsiders club, those who are part of the crew but not quite. Come to think of it, that might be why they both do well in scenes with Naomi too, though she has better social skills than the pair of them combined. The inclusion of William Morgan Shepherd is a welcome one. He's a decent character actor, and I've always got time for a well-played curmudgeonly old bastard, even if this one didn't have a great deal of depth to him. In fact, I can't think of a thing he's been in where I didn't care for his performance, though I'll admit that has much to do with me being rather fond of his voice. His narration for the video game Civilization V is the main thing I remember about it, just as Leonard Nimoy's was for Civilization IV if we're bringing it back to Trek. Come to think of it, there's a pretty strong Star Trek actor to video game voice work pipeline. Maybe there's a video in that somewhere. But again, I digress. Even with those positives, nothing really stands out about this installment. That makes it one of the weaker episodes of Season 5 so far, but it's still worth remembering that a weak Season 5 episode would be average in other seasons. We've seen far worse before, and I'd wager we'll probably see far worse again before we're done. End of episode.
You could be a model for teaching trainee vets about skulls.
No.
You could be the official mascot of the Mexican Day of the Dead.
No.
Oh, you could star in a Hollywood crossover film of Paw Patrol and Ghost Rider.
You know, I think I'd genuinely watch that. But also no.
Okay, so what do you want to do?
Other than bite the legs off whoever designed the safety features on teleporters? I don't know. Speaking of which, why are we still in the teleporter room?
I don't know. Probably some really good reasons, and not just because this is the one background image we've got to work with. Shall we go somewhere else? How about the mess hall?
I guess I could bite off Neelix's legs instead.
See? Things are looking up already. Woof.